You probably by now are guessing that I'm going to talk about my experience as a Muslim woman, and you're not wrong in thinking so. I actually was hoping that I wouldn't have to bring that up today, even though it is such a fundamental part of my identity and how I define myself. It also is something I try to repress a lot, and I feel that I try to do that because usually when that's at the forefront of people's minds when I interact with them or when they see me, if I let it be at the forefront of my mind all the time, then I kind of have to say things or do things the way I would expect a Muslim woman to do it rather than how I would expect myself to do it, if that makes sense. So a lot of the time when we are expressive about our identities, that's the case. We end up being kind of this like token X identity or whatever in the room we, or in our environments. And I'm pretty sure that's felt across all people or all identities. If you're around people that kind of identify similarly to how you identify, then it's easier to just focus on your unique qualities and how to speak up for yourself as just yourself. But then when you're around people who kind of see you as different, then you kind of have to be on the defense. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, is just how to build this sense of resistance and feel more connected to your truth. So I'd like everyone to consider all of the assumptions you automatically make about me when you first see me, whether that be based off of my shoe choice this morning or my decision to wrap this fabric around my head or whatever, or even just like the way I seem to carry myself. Deliberately let those thoughts come to the front of your mind and accept that they're your thoughts. I ask you to do this for two reasons. One is I feel like when we talk about biases or prejudices, we kind of portray them as something that's shameful, but really it's more about accepting that you have them, because everyone does, and then leaving them on the sidelines and not letting them block your vision. So I feel like that's really important to know. And then the second reason I ask you to do that is because a lot of the time, a lot of the thoughts you probably came up with, I used to hold or have towards people who looked like me before I started wearing the hijab. And that may come as a surprise, because you would expect me to understand people who were similar to me or people who identified the same way as me. But I was born and raised in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is a pretty white town, and naturally I adopted the attitudes of my community. And it's been really hard for me to unlearn the things I learned in that community. Okay, sorry. But I was also exposed to my cultural and ethnic cultures and have had to navigate my path that included all of these intersecting kind of identities accordingly. So what it comes down to for me is the fact that I do wear the hijab. Because I choose to express my religious identity every day, I have to carry the weight of the implications it holds that are kind of created by my environment. And when I made the decision to wear the hijab, which was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the hardest thing for me to do was like get over those implications, which were totally blown out of proportion considering my background living here. So I had to constantly look to people who kind of were identified as Muslim women and chose to wear the hijab, and find someone I could reflect myself in, because representation is important. And it was easier for me to adopt this sense of identity when I saw someone that I aspired to be like, or that I looked up to, who was doing the things I wanted to do, but also like wore the hijab while doing it. So after finally making the decision, I felt really proud of myself to have just made the decision to unapologetically express that part of my identity, and it's been a symbol of my empowerment and resistance since. And that was really easy for me to do, I feel, because I was in Lebanon at the time. So I was surrounded by people who kind of just looked more like me, and I didn't have any challenges to like the thought processes of like trying to fight those implications that I learned here that were made towards the hijab. But then when I came back to Colorado 2 years ago, what I wasn't expecting was this sense of leading a double life that kind of creeped back up to the surface. And after having to answer a lot of questions and explain myself over and over again, I kind of had to relearn what it meant to be a hijabi in this new setting. And so, what the hijab means to me is that it allows me to feel more empowered to express myself solely through like what the values I hold in my heart and the knowledge I hold in my brain. So when I talk to people, I just focus on the words, my words and my actions. And it's really kind of started to grow into this resistance for me of how the women body is often sexualized and objectified, and this is sort of my way of resisting that. So when I get caught up in trying to find the right words to justify myself and explain that to people who already have misconceptions towards me and towards Muslim women in general, then it kind of ends up making me feel like I'm a walking contradiction, because I do wear the hijab and I'm not afraid to express my religious identity, but at the same time it's really hard for me to kind of cater to this Western culture when I talk about my experience. And this feeling of being a contradiction is kind of amplified when I talk about how I see myself as a feminist, especially when the ideas of feminism that exist around me kind of don't welcome me and what I stand for into the conversation. But what I've realized is that kind of distorts the definition of feminism, and it's helped me call out how when people aren't welcoming me into the circle, it's more of a kind of self-serving case if you're calling yourself a feminist but not welcoming everyone into the conversation. So yeah. Sorry, my transitions are like super bad. But at this point, this is where I reached my tipping point, because I was really bitter of having to go back and forth between trying to develop my sense of identity and feel closer to my truth while also having to explain myself and kind of be forced to be held accountable to my choice to wear the hijab. So when I went back to Lebanon over the summer, I went there with a purpose. I wanted to learn more about what I had to do to feel closer to my identity and advocate for myself better. I don't know if I approached that the best way. I asked a lot of questions and I challenged everything that was said to me, but I also pointed fingers the same ways people here did at me. To my surprise, though, what I learned was that a lot of what I know about my religion is misleading and wrong, and I've learned it a lot just from my environment or from the media or what people have to say about Islam. And so that was a really shocking experience because, to to have realized that your perception of your own identity has been so distorted and misconstructed by your culture that you can't even advocate for yourself because you don't stand by the definitions people assign to you, it's kind of sucks. So I was really sad to ever have let my environment take something so valuable and essential to how I define myself away from me. So I call that my tipping point because since then it became less about kind of trying to navigate my systems and create a mold for myself that accommodated my surroundings, and it became more about carving my own path and portraying a message of this is me, and if you don't like it, you have to tell me why. Because I don't want to just be I don't want to have self-acceptance but be passive about it. I don't want to just walk around and love myself but not care if people don't love me too when they don't really know me. On behalf of every minority group or everyone who ever felt marginalized, I wanted to claim my voice and kind of just make a statement that even if you feel like I'm taking space in a setting that you don't feel I deserve to, then you need to tell me why, or else we're not going to go forward. And I feel like that is really what it comes down to when we talk about building an inclusive community and kind of trying to figure out how we incorporate these different voices into the conversations we have and how we shift the power balances that exist in our communities. A lot of the time we talk about that without inviting those voices, and a lot of the time the people who need to speak up are too scared to, because it is a scary thing, and especially if you have social anxiety like me. But I feel like it's really necessary, and like Representative Harrod said, after the first time you kind of just like find your voice and develop it, and it's less scary, which I feel like is a really important realization if you want to learn how to better advocate for yourself and everything. But my experience in higher education has really played alongside to my experience in developing my religious identity. I've had a ton of support throughout my college career so far, and I'm super grateful for that and everything. But I also have found myself relying on that support to speak up for myself. And after this summer, I kind of realized that my truth and my voice and my experience can't really be understood by the people around me. Like, I have to own it, and I have to own my dreams and kind of let go of the support, even if it's coming from a loving place, because that's the only way I feel that I can kind of independently advocate for myself. So right now on my wall, hanging on my wall, are quotes like, sometimes the best moments in life are like experiences that no one knows about or can hear about, and stuff like that. So I've kind of adopted this kind of a sense of independence where I appreciate my support, but I also know how to create my own space when there's a lack of support. And that's kind of the message I want to portray to everyone here, is that you can accept love, but don't accept any love that is less than what the love you hold for yourself. And I really urge everyone to just really push the limits of their imagination and dream a world where like they feel that they're accepted and that there are no forces holding them down, and then live as if that were the case. Because I feel like a lot of the time, if you are too afraid to imagine that, then you're too scared to also work towards it. But yeah, I think that's it.